vi på luften igjen med fokus på Israel. Og i dag har vi virkelig fokus på Israel, for vi har med oss sjefen for, for Simon Wiesenthal-senteret i Jerusalem. Og de fleste av oss vet hva Simon Wiesenthal-sentrene driver med. De har siden krigen drevet med det vi kan kalle for nazistjakt, eller nazi-hunts. Nå skal vi da snakke litt med Simon, med Dr. Efraim Zuroff. Heartily welcome.
Thank you very much.
It's an interesting job you have.
Quite interesting.
Yes.
But at the same time, of course, very frustrating.
Yeah.
Because we're fighting a battle also against time.
Yeah, of course.
Not only to find the criminals, but to find them in time so they can still be those who can still be brought to justice.
Yeah, because it's a long time since the World War II, and you are trying to find terrorists from the Holocaust.
War criminals from the Holocaust, yeah. Right.
And
but listen, keep in mind, I was born after World War II.
Yeah.
So if someone would have said in 1948 that I will spend my life, my professional life, hunting Nazis, people would have been very surprised. But what most people don't realize is that one of the most dramatic events or developments that affect my work was the extension of life expectancy. In other words, if 70 years after the end of World War II was in 1915, 100 years ago, there would hardly be anybody left because life expectancy was much shorter. But today, life expectancy is much longer, and many of the people who committed the crimes of the Holocaust live in countries with good medical health care, and they're still alive today.
Yeah. And you are also trying to find some of these old terrorists in Norway.
Yes, I am. We have a project we just started not long ago to try and identify Norwegians who were involved in Nazi war crimes. And the catalyst for this project was an interview that was broadcast by the BBC in October of 2013 with a Norwegian Waffen-SS volunteer by the name of Olav Tuff.
I saw it.
Who related how the men that he served with had rounded up 300 innocent civilians and put them in a public building and put that building on fire, set fire to this building, and they guarded the building so that no one could escape and basically murdered 300 innocent people.
It's unbelievable.
Unfortunately, it's believable if you know the history of World War II.
Yeah, it is believable.
Yeah.
Did you find him?
No, he passed away, actually, shortly after he gave that interview.
Oh.
But I don't know if you're aware of this, but in Norway, you cannot prosecute Nazi war criminals.
No.
Because of the statute of limitations. And Norway is one of only 2 Western countries in which that's the case. In every single other country besides Norway and Sweden, Nazi war crimes, in other words, genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, can be prosecuted to this day with no limitation.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but the humanism is very high lifted up in Norway and in Sweden. We are so good people.
Listen, I would say to you that that's fake humanism.
I know.
In other words, humanism is not to let Nazi war criminals escape justice.
No.
That's not humanism. But very often, you know, people in many countries we find you could say that they have learned the wrong lessons from World War II. A part of this, for example, I see in a country like Germany, where there's a very strong pacifist trend in Germany. But in my eyes, and I'm a historian by profession, and my specialty is the history of the Holocaust, the lesson of the Holocaust is not no more war. It's no more unjust wars. So in other words, this is what we're seeing is also a certain weakness towards aggressive regimes, for example, ISIS in the Middle East, and the likes of these jihadist Islamists. And in certain parts of Europe, there's a very strong reluctance to understand that sometimes you have to fight against these people. And that by being full of love and peace-loving, that does not ensure your security or your existence.
No, You are right, but that's a trend in our countries to be soft and nice and to grow roses.
Listen, we all love roses, and they smell very nice.
It smells very nice.
But that's not what's going to save the world from the jihadists, for example, who are intent on trying to destroy Western civilization.
Yeah, but you are born after World War II. Why did you get these hunting interests? It didn't affect you.
Listen, that's a very good question. And as you can imagine, I'm very often asked how I became a Nazi hunter. And it's interesting because I often encounter people who say to me, wow, you're so lucky. This was my fantasy when I was growing up. You know, I wanted to be, not me personally, they tell me they wanted to be Nazi hunters.
And still you also grown up in America.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So, and very often the people who tell this to me are children of survivors, Holocaust survivors, or perhaps grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. But to be perfectly honest, that was not my fantasy. I never had any such dream. My dream was to be the first religious Jew to play in the National Basketball Association, to become a professional American basketball player. And continue to be a religious Jew. But first of all, that's a little silly because you can't be really a religious Jew and play in the NBA. But that was my dream. But in any event, in a more serious vein, I was always very interested in history, and especially in Jewish history. And I have to say that I was always very intrigued by the Holocaust because I could not grasp. I grasped the event and was very curious to try and understand how such a thing could have happened.
And you never get the answer.
No, I think I have the answer. First of all, I spent many years in graduate school with a specialization in the Holocaust at the Institute of Contemporary Jewry of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem with some of the best professors in the field, especially Professor Yehuda Bauer, who was my advisor for my doctorate. And I think I can answer those questions. What is difficult sometimes in grasping the Holocaust is the scope of the tragedy and the scope of the evil. But I think there are there are explanations which can very clearly explain the background, the events, and how those events affected the background, and how these terrible crimes took place. Although, as you can imagine, there are continued debates between historians. In other words, one debate is whether or not Hitler's planned from the very beginning to physically destroy the Jews, or whether this is something that evolved. That's, for example, one of the debates. But I think that we can point definitely to the factors, whether it's centuries of anti-Semitism, especially by the churches, by the Christian churches, which set a certain pattern, which created a certain animus towards the Jewish people, developed that animus, fostered that animus, the economic conditions in Germany, and reasons that help explain the rise of the Nazi movement and Hitler's attraction to Germany. And of course, one of the things that we see very strongly is that victimhood very often empowers people to do the most horrific things imaginable. In other words, if people feel that they've been wronged unjustly, as in the case of Germany after World War I, that gives them a certain motivation and a certain determination, in other words, to do certain things that under other circumstances they would not do, wouldn't even imagine. And also keep in mind that this whole process was incremental. In other words, in the beginning, they didn't start by pushing Jews into gas chambers. They began by delegitimizing Jews and, in a sense, separating them or expelling them from German society. And slowly, step by step, they ultimately reached the terrible goal of the Endlösung, the final solution of the Jewish problem in Europe, which was a plan to murder every single Jew living in Europe, first in Europe and then the world.
Yes, and They didn't succeed.
Thank God. Thank God they didn't succeed. That's why I'm sitting here today. And that's why we have 6 million Jews living in Israel, thank God.
That's fantastic. But you really expect to find more Nazi criminals today?
I know I can find more.
Yeah.
And
how do you do it?
We do it in different ways. One of the ways that we do it is something called Operation Last Chance, in which we offer a reward of up to 25,000 euros.
Yeah, I saw you have done that in Norway.
Right.
Yeah.
But that doesn't always succeed. And so far in Norway, we haven't gotten any exceptional information, important information. So now we're going back to the archives to search for the people who served in the units that were involved in war crimes, for example, in the Ukraine, to people who served in the camps that were set up here in Norway for Yugoslav prisoners, people who served in the Gestapo here, people who were involved in the deportation of Norwegian Jews to Auschwitz. And we'll see who of those people is still alive. And then we'll try and see if we can present that information to the government and explain to them that the inability to bring these people to justice is a travesty of justice.
How many criminals have you got altogether?
First of all, over the years, I found thousands of suspected Nazi war criminals.
And you brought them to court?
Not all of them. No. First of all, you have to remember that I was able in 1986 to find a way to find the escape routes of Nazi war criminals by comparing or by cross-referencing Red Cross records of refugees with lists of Nazi war criminals. And in that manner, I found the information regarding the post-war escape of more than 3,000 suspected Nazis. But the problem was that this revelation, this discovery, took place in 1986. That's already 41 years after the end of the war. So quite a few of those people were no longer alive.
Oh.
But I succeeded in facilitating legal action against several dozen Nazi war criminals in many different countries. And one of the things you have to keep in mind is that I work for a non-governmental organization. I can't prosecute anybody. But my job is to help facilitate the prosecution in three ways. You know, people ask me, what's your job? So I say 1/3 detective to find the people, 1/3 historian to find the evidence against them, and 1/3 political lobbyist to try and create political will in the countries which are not so anxious or not so willing to bring these people to justice. And unfortunately, most of the countries in the world do not want to bring these people to justice because of the bad publicity, because of the expense, and the problematic scenes of taking elderly people and ostensibly, you know, making their lives difficult. But of course, these are the last people on earth who deserve any sympathy, because these are people who had no sympathy for their victims, some of whom were even older than they are today. And just one other way of explaining the problematics in terms of getting countries to do the right thing, the best way I say is to compare a 90-year-old Nazi war criminal to a serial killer. Let's assume a serial killer were here on the loose in Drammen or in Oslo. I can promise you that the Norwegian police would take every measure to capture that person and put him in jail, because the nature of serial killers is that they continue.
Even if he was 90?
What?
Even if he was 90?
No. I'm saying I'm comparing a 90-year-old Nazi to a serial killer.
Oh, yeah.
In other words, a serial killer, as I said, if he were on the loose here in Drammen or in Oslo, I can promise you that the Norwegian police would be acting very, energetically to catch that person, because the likelihood is that that person will strike again.
Of course.
Right? And of course, the job of the police is to protect society from serial killers. But what are the chances of a 90-year-old Nazi killing someone? 0. In other words, it's never happened. So in other words, the countries understand that if they ignore me and my entreaties and my appeals to them, it's not so dangerous because, first of all, the 90-year-old won't kill anybody. And second of all, within a relatively short time, the person will die.
Yeah, you can interpret that as you will. But in many of these old criminals have been perhaps established a new life. And they are good people.
Oh, good people, you think?
Good people. And
Good people.
they have families and the surroundings respect them. That's perhaps also a reason why different countries hesitate to...
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. That's a reason. That's one of the reasons.
Yeah.
And very interesting. I don't know if you know this, but every Nazi war criminal who's ever been discovered has neighbors who think the person is a good neighbor.
Yeah.
Because he mows his lawn on time, because he takes his dog for a walk every day. But that's absurd. It's absolutely absurd.
Yeah, it is absurd, but it is philosophic difficulty because you think time. We have a saying in Norway that times make everything go away.
Okay, but listen, the passage of time in no way diminishes the guilt of the killers.
No.
And old age should not afford protection to people who committed such terrible crimes. Just because someone was able to escape justice and reach the age of 90, that doesn't turn that person into a righteous Gentile. And what about the victims? Don't the victims deserve that an effort be made to find the people who turned them, innocent men, women, and children, into victims?
Of course.
And there's also the message that we're sending. The fact that we're still looking for these people, they're still being put on trial. For example, next month in Nuremberg in Germany, a trial will start of an Auschwitz person who served in the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp. And there are more trials on the way. So that sends a very powerful message. The crimes of the Holocaust cannot be ignored. Plus, I would add that these trials are important in the fight against Holocaust denial and Holocaust distortion. And to be quite honest, you know, there's a very interesting question that I'm often asked. I often speak to teachers from outside Israel. They come for special courses to Yad Vashem, the Israeli National Memorial, and they ask me to speak to them, explain to them about issues of justice and the like and Nazi crimes. And they say to me, Dr. Zuroff, you know, so many years have passed since the crimes were committed. And these people were young when they committed the crime, certainly the ones that we're dealing with today. They're probably sorry about what they did. And I would strengthen that question by saying, certainly in the last 20 years, there's been so much information about the crimes of the Holocaust in so many different, frameworks, whether it's books, films like Schindler's List, for example, plays, internet, so much available. And these people could, in theory, be exposed to this information. And they could say to themselves, oh, wow, you know, what we did back then was this Holocaust that everyone's talking about. And you know what? We made a mistake. We were young. We were stupid. We were brainwashed.
It's not a mistake.
We thought, one second, we thought that the Jews were the enemy. Mm. We thought that we were doing the patriotic thing by getting rid of them. So I asked the students or the teachers, I said, is it possible, theoretically? Theoretically, is it possible for these people to be sorry? So some say yes, some say no. But what's the bottom line? The bottom line is that in my experience, and I've dealt with dozens and dozens of cases, I have never encountered a single Nazi war criminal who ever expressed any regret or remorse. Even worse,
they don't forget?
Some of them, no, never, not a single case. What's even worse is some of them are very proud of what they did.
Really?
I'll give you an example. The most important Nazi war criminal, I think, that I caught, that I helped bring to justice, was the man named Dinko Šakić, who was the commandant of the largest concentration camp in the Balkans in Croatia, run by the Ustasha, the Croatian fascists, called Jasenovac, a camp in which at least 100,000 innocent Serbs, Jews, Roma, and anti-fascist Croatians were murdered in the most brutal way imaginable. It was individual murder, no gas chambers, no gas vans, swords, daggers, grenades, rifles, pistols, and horrible tortures were invented by these
By one man?
by these Ustasha. Not only by him. He was one of several commanders. So we tracked him down to Argentina. Many Croatian Ustasha ran away to Argentina. And we sent a Argentinian journalist to expose him and to film an interview. And he agreed to be interviewed. And we had arranged for this Argentinian journalist to meet survivors of Jasenovac before he went to interview Dinko Šakić. They told him about their horrific experiences. So when the journalist, his name was Jorge Camarasa, turned to Šakić and said to him, "What do you say about Jasenovac?" So first he said, "What's the problem? Jasenovac was a penal colony, and every person deserved to be there. Who was there deserved to be there." I said, "What about the terror and the executions?" "No executions, people died of typhus." So the journalist, Camarasa, said to him, "Listen, you can't fool me. I spoke to the survivors. They told me about the tortures and all the terrible things that happened." So Šakić says, "You don't understand. The problem with Jasenovac was they didn't let us finish the job." Now, he didn't say that in 1945, okay, when the camp was closed down and the Ustasha ran away. He had 53 years. This interview took place in 1998. In other words, he had 53 years to think about what he had done. And what's his conclusion? Damn it, they didn't let us finish all these people off.
But then he preferred to forget it.
He didn't forget it at all.
No.
He was a fanatic Ustasha till the day he died.
Yeah.
And by the way, he asked to be buried in his Ustasha uniform.
Oh, boy.
And even worse, the priest who gave him the last rites, the priest Vyakoslav Lasic, who gave him a eulogy, listen to this, he gave the eulogy at Šakić's funeral. He said the following. He said, "It's true that Dinko Šakić did not observe all the 10 commandments." And I would add in parentheses, like "thou shalt not murder," for example, okay? But he's a model for Croatia. Now, this is the same Vyakoslav Lasic who every year now organizes a mass, a memorial mass, for the great mass murderer of the Balkans, Ante Pavelić, who is the head of state in the independent state of Croatia, a man who has the blood of hundreds of thousands of innocent people on his hands.
Yeah, it sounds... it doesn't sound good. I was... we have a short of time left, but I was in Yad Vashem in Jubilee, or they had a 50 years Jubilee.
Jubilee, right, sure, yeah.
And they had a transparent over the scene. And on this transparent it said, "Never forgive, never forget, never forgive." And I thought that was difficult.
You have to understand that the Jewish people do not have the tradition of turning the other cheek,
No.
nor do they have a tradition of ever forgetting crimes, terrible crimes that were committed. And I have to say that tradition is a very important tradition for people that suffered as much as the Jewish people. And it is our memory and our remembrance that has helped bring us back to the state of Israel. And
No,
never to forget the victims of the Holocaust or their perpetrators.
Yeah. No, it's they will never forget. That's true, and it's too terrible to be forgotten.
Right.
Yeah.
It's exactly the case.
The time has gone, and we should have talked a lot of more things about. You have a long story, and you have many interesting things that you have been through and working with. But I have to say thank you for this short little talk, and welcome back, and good luck.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me, and thank you for the support of this television station for the state of Israel and the Jewish people.
Of course. Thank you.